Welcome to the Sensible Center podcast, where two middle-aged guys drunkenly talk politics and political reform. Grab an adult beverage and enjoy the show. Further information can be found at sensiblecenterpack.com. You can reach us at sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com or follow us on X at USASCPack. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Kevin. We're almost there. It's football season.
Summer is almost over, and the Bears are going to win the Super Bowl this season. Yeah.
You're very optimistic. Who's going to win the presidency?
Who's going to win the president? Caleb Williams. That's who's going to win the presidency.
Williams.
It's all I care about.
All right.
That's all I care. We haven't talked in a while. We'll get right into it because people don't like us chit-chatting.
I don't like us chit-chatting. Our listeners are smarter than we are.
What are you drinking? Let's just start with that so we don't forget.
I've got an Old Forester, 100 proof store pick.
Do you have any new Forester there, or is it all old?
No, new people don't like me in my old ways.
You just go with the Old Forester? I think Old Forester's a racist, to be honest with you. I just have a picture of Old Forester. It's a guy on a porch, and it's not a good look.
All right, I think I'm going to dump this out and drink some Buffalo Trace now.
So I'm drinking an American classic. You ever hear the term highball?
Yeah.
Is that a term you're familiar with?
My grandfather used that term a lot. I was actually just thinking about him while I was walking up the stairs getting ready for this podcast.
Yeah, we were talking about highball. It's definitely a before even my generation term, probably my parents, and definitely my grandparents' term. I have no idea where the term highball comes from. I should look it up. But I'm drinking a classic highball, which is a Seagram's and 7.
That's it. That's it. It's exactly what he used to drink, and he called it a highball.
It's the classic highball.
I love those. They're great.
I saw that we had some Seagram's again. I don't know who. I know I never purchased Seagram's, but I'm like, and I had some 7-Up in the fridge, so I'm like, I'm just going to mix myself some Seagram's and 7. So I'm living in like 1967. I don't have a proper highball glass, though.
So to save our listeners from having to Google where highball came from, according to Difford's Guide, whatever that is, the oldest record of the moniker dates back to an 1894 play where one character asks another to bring them a highball whiskey drink. Interestingly, there are competing claims for where highball actually originates. There it is.
Well, that wasn't much of an explanation.
It was not, but that's
I don't know why it's called a highball. That's the question. Why the term highball? So
if you drink too many of them, your wife kicks you, and then you know what happens to your balls.
We're going to open up the phone lines now and see if any of our listeners know what highball means. All right, let's go. So since we last spoke, which was about a month ago, spoke this way because we had a couple podcasts with a great guest, Dr. Tony Bryson. So if you haven't listened to those, please do. Got some great feedback on those podcasts in regards to somebody intelligent being on our podcast. Basically, I think it's the only podcast my wife has listened to thus far. She's like, "Oh, this sounds good." I'm like, "Yeah, that's because we're not saying that much."
It's the first time that I've actually heard from people that they had an emotional reaction to any of our podcasts. So it's a good thing, I think.
Yep, we need more guests. So anyway, since that time, since we last spoke, I actually attended a political rally. If you remember, I attended a Trump rally, I think in December in Iowa during the primaries, and then shortly after Kamala, see, I'm still saying Kamala.
Does it really matter?
Picked Tim Walz as her running mate. I think it was their second time together. They did a rally in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is a little, probably an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes from where we're at. So I'm like, I'm going to go. And my lovely wife wanted to go too, so we made it a day, which you can do when you're retired. So just some of my impressions since I haven't talked about it. It was actually a pretty big crowd, bigger than I had imagined, but poorly organized, I would say.
Kind of
So
like the whole Biden administration.
it is something about the Democrats. They can't seem to and we'll talk about the convention in a bit, which I was surprised that they were able to pull that off.
But to be fair, nobody was shot.
Nobody was shot, and as I pointed out to you at the time, they did have snipers and drones there. So make what you will of it. I think the security was
Aren't
fairly
all,
tight.
aren't all Democrats drones?
Oh, Bob. So we get in. They say we have to have our ID and everything, but like voting, we don't have to. We just strolled through. Uh, I've had tougher security at a concert than going in within, spitting. Not I could have thrown a rock or something if I wanted to. Not necessarily spitting distance since I can't, but we were pretty close. Let's say that. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's metal detectors. There's the Secret Service, but I could have been literally anyone walking in there, no ID, no nothing. Um, Long line to park. We had to park down a side street because there was only one way in. Uh, they gave you a little bottle of water. It was warm outside. People were dropping like flies. When Walz started talking, two people dropped dropped down right in front of him, which then he had to wait like 10 minutes because I guess it's not proper to continue your speech while somebody might be dying, which I found interesting. Uh, then they had music. You ever hear of Bon Iver? Bon Iver. I call him Bon Iver, but Bon Iver. It
I've
was
got a
actually,
couple off-color jokes here. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
all right. I guess he's from Eau Claire, the guy who's. There is not a guy named Bon Iver, but that's the band's name, which is sort of like a dreamy millennial type of music. So, as part of the poor organization, the speeches, the initial speeches, they had the governor, senator, and all that. That was fine. And then there was like a 50-minute break after Bon Iver played his sleepy music that nothing happened. And they were playing like literally reggae music, which I found kind of sort of funny because of Kamala's Jamaican background, right? I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, this is kind of funny. And then they were playing other sleepy music, and I'm like, oh, they should be playing something,
Were
you
they
know.
passing around any of that Jamaican stuff?
No, there wasn't. I didn't smell weed at all, which is surprising given the crowd.
Well,
Uh,
that's why I was kind of curious whether I assume everybody got frisked and maybe people were not, they knew better. But
yeah, it's not legal in Wisconsin, so which is kind of weird. But anyways, so I was complaining about the music, and then some millennial overheard me. He's like, "Whoa, what kind of music would you want?" And I said, "How about YMCA? It seems to work for Trump." At which point he looked at me, gave me a dirty stare. I'm like, "At least it'll get people up and dancing." So,
you got to get people moving. You want the energy, right?
so,
Politics is an art. It's less and less substance nowadays.
so to be honest with you, like while we were waiting those 50 minutes with nobody saying anything, and I honestly think I haven't gone back and checked the timing, but JD was also in town that day, just like down the street. That's when he was following her around the country. And I'm thinking he jumped in with his coverage and his conference right before she was going to come on. And they decided to wait until he was off and at the top of the hour to get the news coverage of the rally, which I understand, but for the people who are standing out there, it's kind of rude, right?
I was reading that she gave the same exact speech there that you did at the prior one she gave.
Oh,
too.
I would imagine. I would imagine so. Um, yeah, speeches were decent. I would say Walz is more of a natural than she is, as far as being charismatic and working the crowd, which kind of, I guess.
I think he would probably be able to relate pretty
Yeah.
well to that crowd in the upper Midwest there.
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of people from Minnesota since it was fairly close up there, so he had a little bit of a hometown crowd. Um, but during the long delay, I was literally thinking of giving my vote to Trump because I'm like, if they can't organize a rally, what are they going to do with the country? That's what I was thinking. I'm like, come on, guys, get your stuff together. Although then I was like, well, they only had a little bit of time to put it together, and in the moment I was kind of ticked off, but and plus they didn't have no merchandise. When I went to the Trump rally, there were people selling all kinds of stuff out in front. They didn't even give us signs. I'm like, what? You're missing the opportunity of this is your people, right? These are the people who are going to go out and promote you, and you're missing the opportunity. We were talking to people. They're like, I would have bought a T-shirt. I would have bought a sign. I would have whatever. And I know, again, short notice and whatever, but you got to be able to do that kind of stuff. I don't know if they have it now in the rallies, but again, missed opportunities. So that's kind of just my take on the rally. I thought it was interesting to go and just see the crowd, mostly older people and younger people you would expect to have 7 hours in their day in the middle of the week to go attend a political rally in the middle of nowhere. But it was kind of interesting. So, anything else on that, Bob, on the Kamala rally?
Nope.
Kamala. I keep on saying. I've been
Kamala.
I've been practicing Kamala. Now I'm saying Kamala. So, also since then, we could talk about Tim Walz because I know you've sent me a lot of things on him, and it seems like the attack force is on him for some reason. I don't quite understand why.
Well, he was new and he was creating the excitement at the time. I think it's fallen away from him somewhat. I think it's kind of back on Kamala. One thing that I found interesting is the convention bounce that you normally see so far hasn't occurred. She's got a little bit, but not the typical amount that you would normally see in a lot of the polls. Of course, I question the accuracy of polls, generally speaking, nowadays anyway, because it's very difficult to randomly get somebody on the phone anymore. And most of the rules say that you can't call people if they know you're calling. Internet doesn't work very well for that sort of thing because it's never really truly random, right? So I'm not sure how much I believe polls so much anymore, but her bounce hasn't been great from the convention. And I think part of it is the Trump campaign's starting to finally figure out how to get their messaging straight when it comes to her, right? Focus on her history with the Biden administration, for instance. But what I see with Walz, because that's really what was brought up, it's just kind of more of the same of what was with the Biden administration, right? Lots of politicking, lots of misleading, not a lot of action.
Yeah,
most of Walz's history, right, it surrounds like the George Floyd riots and his lack of action there. And then, of course, he's got the whole, it's not difficult to attack somebody arguing in favor of putting tampons in boys' school bathrooms, right? And he went pretty heavy on that sort of thing.
But here's the thing.
There's evidence out there of under his administration, there's a directive that if DCFS, Child Services, I don't know what it is, the equivalent is in Minnesota, goes to a house to look into whether or not the children are being mistreated, there's a set of rules for
You're bringing up something new now.
African American folks.
You're bringing up something new.
And there's a set of rules for other folks.
You're blindsiding me, Bob.
And the standard is different. I know. I just read about it an hour ago.
Yeah, right.
But he's set a lot of standards and exceptions based on race, right? And a lot of his policies seem to be very woke. And then he's got a history of, I would call it misleading at best and flat out lying at worst when it comes to his military history and the rank he supposedly retired with and other things that we've talked about over the last period, right? So he's easy to attack, and we both know how campaigns work. You start small, and then things start coming out. Either you're holding something back so you get closer to the election, or somebody eventually gets their story vetted and they get the money that they wanted for the information, and then these bigger stories start coming out. So I think it's really early It's not a great sign how it kind of started for Tim.
Well,
Lying and misleading.
here's my take on him. I didn't know anything about him, right? If you asked me who the governor of Minnesota was 3 months ago, I couldn't tell you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So virtual unknown to the country at that point. So I immediately thought, well, Shapiro had a larger presence nationally, probably Pennsylvania. You had Mark Kelly. I think those were kind of the three finalists, the senator from Arizona. So when she named Walz, I was like, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. But then as I researched his background and I found out more about Shapiro and Kelly, I'm like, I think this makes sense. Upper Midwest, which is clearly, you could pretty much tie Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Together. Coming from the Upper Midwest and being here, I think it's a very similar mentality between the states. I would say Minnesota's more left.
Collar,
yeah,
so.
I would say Minnesota's more left of the three, but he comes from Nebraska originally. He's got the military background. He's a teacher. So you check those two boxes pretty good. He ran in a blue district. A red district for Congress. Won 6 times, I think, in that district. And then he hasn't lost an election. Won 2 for governor. So Shapiro's only been in a year and a half and was a former attorney general, which then repeats the experience that Kamala has. So I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And Kelly's just new to the game. He's only been in a couple years. So
I think Kelly would have been the safer pick. My opinion is they didn't choose Shapiro because of what he said about Israel and his support of Israel and the fact that's why I think that she didn't choose him. I think look, she's already got Minnesota tied up. Minnesota's not going to go the other way. It's not that close.
Right. No, it's not.
I don't know if there's anybody in Wisconsin or Michigan, for that matter, who are going to see Tim Walz and say, okay, I like that guy. I'm voting for Kamala.
I think he's very likable.
Sure. I'm not saying he's dislikable. I'm just saying at this point, I don't know if he's going to swing votes.
Yeah, I don't know. He's gotten a lot more attention than a lot of VPs, and
I can tell you that, when it comes to Trump, J.D. Vance doesn't matter to me one way or the other, right? And when it came to Obama, Biden didn't make a darn bit of difference to me one way or the other. I don't even remember who Romney was running with, or McCain, for that matter. Oh, McCain had Palin, so I guess I do remember that.
Yeah, I think she was a negative for McCain.
Yeah, she was easy to kind of attack, and you can see them trying to kind of attack Walz in a similar manner. He's a liar. He's not consistent with what he says. I
think Pence helped Trump. I think Pence did. He gave him sort of the adult in the room. He gave him the evangelical background. So I do think that was a decent choice then. JD, I don't know anything that he gives Trump. I thought that was a bad choice.
I thought Ramaswamy was the way to go there. I really did.
Somebody different. I guess he couldn't choose Rubio, but somebody else besides JD. So I actually think JD might hurt him at the end of the day.
I think it's Ohio. That's a big state, and you got to kind of win that.
Yeah, but I think he already had Ohio.
And I think JD had some union ties that he was looking for. When you consider they even had that union head at the Republican convention, right? So I think they're trying to make the tent bigger, bring more people into the tent. Whether or not that works, I don't know. I'm not sure. I know in the past, the first time Trump won, you and I had a bet over a case of beer.
Yep.
And I said, Trump's going to win. And you're like, there's no way. And I knew it. I could feel it out there. This one, I'm not sure. I really don't have a good feel. I feel like a lot of the enthusiasm for Kamala right now, especially given her past, is fake. I don't know how much of it is real because it's all. I don't hear anybody talking about Kamala at all where I live.
Well,
Nobody
you
even
live in
talks about her.
Tennessee, Bob.
I mean, right, but nobody even. I mean, even negatively, nobody talks about her. And people love to talk politics down here. They talk Trump, they talk conservatism all the time. They don't even bring her name up. You go on the internet and you're reading it, but it's all coming from these big news agencies who aren't even writing stories about how it's wrong that they're not being granted interview access to her, right? So
Well,
I can't get a good feel.
well, I'm in a swing state, probably one of the most important ones, right? And I'm in the middle of it. I'm in a rural area. And I will tell you, from 2020 to now, I see more Democratic signs than I saw 4 years ago. I didn't really see any 4 years ago. I see them. I'm not saying I see as many as I see Trump signs, but I see them.
At the same time, Trump's polling numbers are stronger in the swing states now than they were 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. But then you get into what polling means, right?
Right.
So as far as the enthusiasm ground thing, I am from Wisconsin, at least being in the middle of the state in the rural, I sense more enthusiasm than I did in 2020. Whether it will continue, I think that's her biggest. I don't know if we want to talk about any of the Walz stuff. You've basically said it's washed away, but you mentioned the misrepresentations, and clearly there were some things that were in his record that were either overstated a bit. I don't think,
Or he kind of remained silent while somebody else talked him up.
I don't think any of them are game changers.
No,
I mean,
if I'm
do
going to
I
make
care?
the argument that he doesn't matter, the argument of what he did doesn't matter either, right? So, go ahead.
Well, what he did was serve 24 years in the military, and he's been a teacher all his life, and he has a barely noticeable net worth because he's been in public service his whole life. So you put that against whether he got an award from the junior JCs or the JCs or the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, or whether it was appropriate to say he retired as a master commander versus he actually earned that title. Yes, it should all be corrected. It should all be correct. I don't think any of that has stuck to him one way or another. But I do think you can attack him go after him on his policies, and I think that's what they need to do. They need to focus in on, is he, again, moving the party further left?
I don't think the Republicans should focus on his policy at all. I think they should focus on Kamala's policy, what she's done and the Biden administration has done over the last 4 years, where our country is as a result. Focus on the illegal immigration, focus on the money we're spending on illegal immigrants, focus on education numbers and how the education system's gone south over the last 4 years. Focus on taxes, focus on what she wants to do, focus on the communist nature, and I don't use that term lightly, of some of the policies she wants with the price controls and things like that. I've been reluctant to use that term when it comes to her until she's pretty much come out pretty strongly with price caps, price controls.
We'll get into price gouging. But I have a question for you. And you can honor. This is how I look at it, right? It's not, are you better or worse off than where you were at 4 years ago? It's, when you were in 2020 and you knew Biden won the election and you knew we were in the middle of COVID, are we in a better place now than you would have guessed we would have been back then? That's how I look at it.
I look
at what was handed to them and where we're at, and I would say economically, definitely better. Definitely better in comparison to any other industrialized country in the world.
Where do you think we'd be if Trump was president over the last 4 years?
That's not in consideration. We might still be in COVID. I don't know.
I know you're joking there. I hope you are.
Well, I don't know. I can't. All I could look at is where we were at going in November 2020 with January 6th and all that was occurring at that point, and saying, okay, 3.5 years later,
Our government
no
was buying advertisements for Pfizer
recession,
and Moderna.
no
That's what was
recession,
happening then. Everything.
employment
Can you
strong.
imagine if, like, I was selling paper and I had the entire government telling media what they could and couldn't say, and social media could and couldn't say about my paper company? Man, I'd be rich.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about
You lost
COVID.
me.
The whole government was nothing
What's
but
a
a
paper
giant
company?
propaganda media scheme
What
to sell
was?
pharmaceuticals.
COVID was?
The stories
Is that what you were
were
saying?
the government had to know it wasn't that bad.
Oh, I think it was pretty bad, Bob. I think over 1 million people died of COVID. I don't know if you think so, but
How many of those people actually died of COVID versus some other
a
comorbidity?
good number of them. I mean, you could look at excess deaths, Bob. That's how you judge it, and it was significant. More people died than they would have normally died. Lots more. So you could say it was something else, but there are excess death figures. You could look at what was happening before and what was happening after, and
You can also look at
I
what
personally
companies
know
like
personally
countries-
know several people who died from it,
You can look at Norwegian countries
and they weren't old people.
who didn't shut down at all, and they did better
You
than
mean
the countries that
Scandinavian
shut down.
countries?
Yep. Sorry. Yeah,
I don't know if that's the
Thank you.
case because I was in Scandinavia last year, and I was reading stuff there. I don't know if they were too happy with the way they were treated, and they're different societies anyway, so you can't really compare apples and oranges. But they're socialist societies too, so if you want to be a socialist society,
They're definitely more liberal than we are, but
Yeah.
they didn't shut down and they did better.
well, they have other
Percentage-wise,
supports.
less
They have
people
other
died.
supports too, right? I mean, it's a whole different
Their
scenario.
economy
And I
did
don't know.
better. They didn't end up having to pump a bunch of money into the economy and inflate their currency.
We inflated our currency. We might have debased our currency. We didn't inflate it. So you're saying we just pumped a bunch of money in. We made it look good. It's all smoke and mirrors. There's no real economy here. We're heading. I just know every year.
No, I think there's obviously a real economy here. Trump did a lot
okay.
of work towards
Oh,
trying to bring
Trump did?
manufacturing back, right? He did. He was bringing
Trump
a
did?
lot of stuff back. Yes, absolutely, he did.
He did the rewrote NAFTA. I agree with that. I don't have an issue with that. He did the tariffs in China, which I guess was a protectionist, not a. I guess
which
in
Biden's
the
now
end of the
expanded
day,
on.
I don't know how that didn't increase inflation, but I guess we forget about that. But when we bring stuff here, it's going to cost more, right?
Tariffs obviously raise
Costs, right?
costs. Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
So
No doubt about it.
and we pay our workers better here than China. So yes, you are bringing stuff on shore, but you're also raising costs, which you can't have it both ways. You can't complain that Biden's caused inflation when you're raising tariffs and bringing manufacturing back. Now, you could argue whether
When
we
Trump
should do
left
that or
office,
not. I think we
inflation was
should.
very, very, very low.
Yeah, but it's
And when
always
Biden was
it's
in
always
office, the
lagging.
first April Biden was in
It
office,
lags.
I remember saying to you, as a matter of fact, inflation is crazy, it's out of control, it's increasing. And you said something along the lines, it's not that bad, and it's just
It still wasn't
transitory.
that bad. It wasn't that bad, and it was transitory. I mean, look at the historical record. Considering you have to
If I look at, and I've done
oh,
this, I've tested this, I've looked, what I bought at Walmart back in 2019, I can go out there and look in my cart, I can put that same stuff in my cart today, and it's literally 3 times the price. 3 times.
3 times. It's not
3 times. $75 to $175. Maybe not 3
3
times.
times the price.
2.5 times. 2.25
It's not.
times. It's ridiculous. It absolutely is.
It's not.
Go out there.
we'll-
Have you
we'll
done
get-
any online Walmart shopping? Just
We'll get in there. I
go
shop
do it.
every week.
Online? Have you ever bought groceries online?
I can't buy groceries.
See if you can
online
find an old
here.
grocery cart.
Actually-
Just basic stuff, meat, ground beef, eggs, whatever you happen to buy back in 2019. You can see. Go look. Try to buy that same stuff today. It's significantly more money.
I'm sure your grocery prices are cheaper than mine here in central Wisconsin.
It's, yeah. I
Uh,
don't know. I wondered how much was from the move
I don't
and
think
how much
anything
was from.
supports three times the price. I don't think any data. And you could say they're making it up, but then you could say
It
they're
went from
making
like
up anything.
78, $79 to over $175 for the same cart of stuff. And
You got to stop buying the filet mignon and the toilet paper that's real
I'm
soft,
not
Bob.
buying filet mignons from Walmart. I buy that from the butcher.
Oh,
But
excuse
that's the
me.
thing. You're doing it wrong if you buy meat from Walmart or produce for that matter.
So here's the thing, Bob.
But Walmart's great for other
Here's the
stuff.
thing. We can complain about. We'll get into the price gouging and whatnot because we still need to talk about that. But somehow we've gotten into to talking about inflation. So again, here's the thing. When I was heading into 2021, I kept on hearing there's going to be recession, blah 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 blah. Jobs were going to get hit. None of that happened. The economy's been very resilient. They've gotten inflation under control. You could argue with that or not, but it's somehow under 3% now. Yes, it went up to 9%. Considering the fact that we had an
Growing
unprecedented,
3% on top of the 9% and the
yes,
7%
yes,
mark.
yes, yes, it's cumulative. Considering we had an unprecedented shutdown worldwide that disrupts supply chains, on top of that, we were throwing out money into the system, right? We were flooding with liquidity, which we can argue whether that's correct or not, but history has proven from the Great Depression to the Great Recession that you're better off erring on the side of putting too much liquidity in the system rather than too little. Again, I would say they put too much, but in hindsight, it's 2020. So given all of that we haven't experienced a recession yet, we're heading into the next election. Inflation appears under control. Yes, housing prices are too high. You could say food prices are too high. They haven't. Wages have kind of gone up, but generally on the economy, I would say great. The only thing I would give Biden like a D on was the border. I think they got to that too late. I think they got to that bipartisan bill too late.
You don't
They,
think that nuclear regulatory dude was worth a D and keeping him for so long, or her, or whatever?
that was just noise in the background, Bob. That's not really.
Well, his whole administration was full of people who had no qualification except for their leftist, wokest policies.
Yeah, the woke thing is another thing.
It's bad decision making.
I don't think Biden controls the woke agenda. I think he's just reacting to it.
But I think Kamala does. She will, and she continues to.
Yeah, I don't know about that. And then the foreign policy thing. So you could say, well, there wasn't any wars under Trump. Of course, there was COVID for a while. So obviously there wasn't too much going on. Putin invaded Ukraine. Hamas attacked Israel. I would say
You don't think Trump would have got in front of that stuff?
Putin in Ukraine. I think the way Biden reacted to Putin in Ukraine, I would give him a B plus A minus. To get
He let it
NATO
happen.
to get NATO. I don't know if he let it happen. That's not how I would characterize it. I think Putin was
He
going
didn't
to do
stop
it
it.
one way or another. No, he couldn't. I don't know. They threatened Putin. Putin was going to do it anyway. So we could get into the reasons why Putin did it or not, but it happened. And I think the reaction in getting NATO and where we're at now, I think, yes, we've spent money, but we've also sort of neutralized that for now. I don't know where it's going to end up. That's the problem with these situations. They become endless. But nobody's talking about that. As far as Israel, I think we're supporting Israel. I think we're trying to be fair and putting pressure on them to try to resolve the situation. We don't have a ceasefire yet. We don't have any peace agreement. It hasn't exploded into a regional conflict yet, which I'm sort of surprised at that it hasn't. especially with some of the back and forth and what Israel has done as far as attacking Iran and killing people within the country that we haven't seen. Although it's been predicted that it was going to get wider, it hasn't. So something's occurring there. We send Blinken over there every couple weeks. Some diplomacy's happening to keep a lid on it, right? At least for now. So I don't think he could have controlled whether Hamas attacked Israel. Again, I think, given the situation, I think, yes, people are still being killed. The hostages are still out there, but it hasn't exploded into a regional conflict yet. So, again, I would give him a B plus on that.
How much money have we spent on that garbage?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the other option. That's the Trump option.
Although
I think he would be supporting Israel more. We're going to keep pouring money into
there, and the thing is, you're going to have the same result, right? I mean, do we agree Ukraine's not going to win?
I don't know.
Russia's going to have more land, or they're going to get their way one way or another. They're not going to win.
But they're not going to get all of Ukraine.
They weren't going to take it.
Oh,
anyway.
I think that was his intention. From all the reading I could tell, he thought he was going to be in Kiev in less than a week. He was going to topple Zelensky, and he was going to install his own.
You honestly believe that Russia doesn't have the firepower? And that's the thing that drives me crazy, right? It's like, how many times has Zelensky been out in the middle of the street talking and on camera? Russia knows where that guy is at all times. They haven't dropped a missile on his head, right?
Okay, so what's the theory?
Russia could have very, very easily taken the guy out, done a lot more damage missile-wise. It's not like they're...
Evidently not. What, you think they're holding... I actually had somebody at the pool this week say, we're not going to have an election, and the reason is that we're going to be in World War III by the November, and because he thinks Putin's been holding back, and now he's going to unleash the gates of hell. I'm like, why would he be holding back? Tell me again what the theory is here. So you sound like he's holding back.
If he wanted... That's the thing. That's what's difficult, right? Is I don't know if I trust our media, generally speaking.
Yeah, you should question everything.
But I believe if he really wanted a fast, quick war to just take that country and the whole country, he'd have done it by now.
So you think he wanted to drag out the conflict and lose a lot of lives and spend a lot of money?
I think he knows if he had done a lot of damage and killed a lot of civilians, Europe's reaction maybe would have been different. And, I don't know that America's reaction would have been much different. I think we would have continued to just pour money in there. I really do think that our politicians, and I'm not making a judgment necessarily on why, but I do think our politicians love the fact that we can spend all this money on our own military industrial complex, right?
Oh yeah,
we're buying the missiles, we're buying the bombs. It's going back into these companies, right? Boosts their stock, which a lot of our politicians own.
Yep, I don't argue with that.
It provides money for R&D, which means we can advance the weapons that are super ultra secret that nobody knows we have, and hopefully never will need to know we have, that sort of stuff.
But that would be arguing that our enemies are stronger than we think they are, right? Because that would mean that we have to spend more on military versus less. You're arguing that Putin is stronger and he's holding back. I would say he's less.
I'm saying he's got a goal.
He's less than we think he is.
I don't know. Obviously, I don't know. But there's a lot of stories out there about labs similar to Wuhan being run and funded by us in Ukraine, right? He didn't want them there.
What?
There's a lot of some stories out there about.
You've been on Elon's thing again.
Rebels of not necessarily rebels, but military people being trained by the U.S. right on his border. It'd be kind of like if Russia was pumping a lot of money into Mexico to train fighters.
Without a doubt, he felt threatened. mostly
Yep.
become from and we would feel threatened the same way, right? If
We
I
would.
mean,
Absolutely.
considering
And
you've got missiles pointed at you from, let's say Toronto or something, right? We would
Yep.
feel very threatened.
We
We're
would. And I
we're
think that's,
we're very lucky that we've got an ocean between us, and we've got Canada and Mexico, and our whole hemisphere is kind of our own.
and
I
that's
can't
what I was
imagine.
getting at. I think he
Yeah,
felt threatened, and he was,
of
at the
course.
same time, he doesn't want a nuclear war. He knows better, right? And I'm
Yeah,
not saying the guy's a great guy either. I'm not saying he's a great guy. I'm just saying that he,
oh, that's good.
he. I think it's more about that than wanting to take over Ukraine.
No, I think he did want to take over Ukraine, and in fact, the book I just read about the Biden administration, Zelensky didn't believe that he was going to come and take over Ukraine. It was actually Biden and the intelligence that we had tracking what Russia was going to do that actually prevented what Putin actually wanted to do, which was quick attack. Because we saw them, and we were out in front of that more than any other country. We were explaining it to him. We were explaining it to Europe. He's going in. Now, you said we didn't prevent it. I don't know how we would have prevented it, other than, and we did threaten Putin. We said we know what you're doing. We went to the military, to the foreign minister, and said, we know what we're doing. You're going in. And they said, of course we're not. It's just exercises. And we said, no, you're going in. Then we explained to Zelensky, and then we started to prepare them for what they were going to do because we figured it out. So that's the facts, I believe. And you could ask Zelensky or not whether that's the case after the fact. But we were the ones who figured it out. We were the ones that got him prepared. And I think that threw Putin off because I think he thought he was just going to walk in. And so ever since then, he's been playing catch up. I don't know how it's going to end. I'm guessing it's going to end. They're going to have some settlement. He's going to get the Donbass region and get some land back, some where that are primarily Russian people living. That just always makes sense to me, but that's a small part of the country. There'll probably be some economic settlement or whatnot. I don't think Zelensky's going to not be able to give him something just to save face. But we'll see where it heads. But anyways, we should get back to domestic politics. The DNC convention, you sounded like you watched some of that.
Yeah, I watched a portion from every day. The first day that the rep from Texas, I was a representative, not a senator, right? Forget her name.
Yep.
I had enough.
Yeah, she
I watched
was
everything up to
interesting.
that.
She's a firecracker.
I got maybe 10 minutes into her speech, and I was like, nope, I can't do this because I wanted to break my TV. Just gaslighting BS, No.
You're going to shoot your TV like Elvis?
What stands out to me, too, Walz's rant about not trusting somebody from Yale, taking shots at J.D. Vance right around the same time Bill Clinton was speaking, who also came from Yale, I thought was pretty silly and ridiculous. Overall, my opinion is there was very, very little policy, and there was a lot of cheerleading. Yeah. And I guess that's what those conventions are. I mean, looking back at the Republican convention, it was pretty similar.
I think that's all they are.
Yeah.
And I think as far as that one goes, I mean, I watched the RNC. I think the Dems have some really good speakers. I think the Obamas and the Clintons are, whatever you like or dislike about them, they're fairly charismatic and they could give a speech. Better than a lot of the Republicans.
Yeah, Hillary too. I mean, thing is, I think Hillary was trying to gaslight, and I can't remember what it was she said, but I care so little about her anymore. I kind of felt like whatever she said didn't really matter. I don't know. I mean,
I think she did a good job considering she's got to be like so conflicted inside that Kamala's might be the first female president, and she's like,
She had a line or two that was actually
It's got to be.
pretty humorous. You know, I had to kind of give her some credit for that, and I don't remember what they were anymore. Something along the lines of, yeah, Trump's been doing this to Kamala. I can't imagine what that's like. You know what I mean? But, yeah, I don't know. Talking, what's frustrating to me is when you want to yell at the screen why these people are wrong, and then they're just acting like Republicans are just assholes, and there's not policy or a goal behind it. That it upsets me, and I know the other side does the same thing. So
See, this is what I've been. If you rewind the podcast to like 3 or 4 months ago, I said that the Democrats needed to take some things from the Republican playbook, as far as gaslighting, as far as trolling them, as far as having some fun with it. And I think they've started to do that. And whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with running on vibes or, I mean, sort of a cult of personality a little bit versus kind of policy wonking it, which is typically the Democrats' thing. They do boring stuff. They talk about policy. I think they've taken an opposite and they've said, that's not really where we're going. We're going to talk higher themes and not specifics, which is interesting. And then kind of like you said, gaslighting and sort of attacking the other side in certain ways. Whether the strategy will ultimately work, it's something that they haven't done before, which I find interesting. So I sort of like that part of it. I think it's driving the Trump side and the Republican side nuts that they haven't sat for an interview yet, which I guess they're going to do tomorrow night on CNN, which I don't think it's going to provide the comfort that the other side's looking for. But honestly, I could care less whether they do or not. If I was telling them strategy, I would tell them don't sit in front of anyone. Don't answer questions. Keep on trying to continue with the momentum as much as you can. Because once you start getting into the details and the specifics and you start talking, you're going to give them something to attack you on, right? And
but that's the thing, though. I mean, she wants to be a leader, right? She wants to be the leader of the country.
Yeah.
Some people would refer to her as the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
But the thing is at this point, she's not proven herself to be a leader, and I don't think I'm the only one who sees it that way. She's yet to tell us what her policy is.
Well,
the policy gets potentially leaked out through media sources, but it's never confirmed, so she doesn't really have to take a stance. And she's not only not set a policy, but what her strategy is for achieving the policy that gets leaked out. So far, she's refused to take questions from reporters.
But what does that matter?
The policy gets leaked out as copying Trump, like the no taxes on tips.
Yeah.
Now there's a wall.
Oh, yeah. There's a wall.
She probably, in my opinion, she figured stealing from Trump is easy after she saw him get away with BS, because the stolen valor stuff, the media hasn't really addressed that at all.
You mean
the media carries water for her. She can say what she wants. So all of a sudden, no taxes on tips. The media doesn't portray that, unless it's Fox News, as stealing from Trump. It's Kamala's great idea. But so far, from what I've heard, especially from the convention, her strategy is fluff speak and Trump fear porn.
Yeah.
You know, it's enough to kind of maybe get her over the finish line.
Yeah, that's all it's about, isn't it?
But the truth is, once she's over the finish line, she's just going to continue to let the administrative state keep administrating.
We don't care about truth.
Kamala's not going to lead. She's going to do what Biden's doing right now, who's not running the country. She's going to let the administrative state keep administrating. She'll attend a meeting here and there.
Yeah.
Have the standard events. She'll go to her parties. She'll dance. She'll drink.
Yeah.
Have her dinner affairs for 4 to 8 years, but she's no leader.
It'll be very joyful.
She is not a leader.
It'll be very joyful.
And
maybe that's
again,
what the country needs.
She hasn't taken a policy. We need a leader.
A leader.
A leader. We've had the administrative state pulling this crap for 50 years, and it's probably longer than that, and we're not moving in a positive direction. That is insane. Military spending, but spending overall is out of control. the stuff we've done in the Middle East over the last 50 years hasn't made things better there, especially for the people living there. It's made things worse. Just look all around. And then internally, the way the dollar is worth so much less than it was, the policy from the administrators say we don't have leaders.
Dollar's strong.
And
I was just telling you about how cheap Spain is. Go to Japan. You could. Well, the yen's been up a little bit. You could still get a lot of stuff in Japan. Dollar's strong.
The dollar's strong in Japan.
No, it's strong around the world.
You used to be able to get a sack of potatoes 4 years ago for 98 cents.
That's here. Go somewhere else and buy a sack of potatoes with your dollar. It'll be cheap.
I live here. And here's the thing
that's
that
why
really
I'm going
drives
overseas,
me crazy
Bob.
about this Kamala and the Democrat promising things. Because if they promise to give things and they don't specify how it's going to be paid for, which Kamala to date has not, you can bet that you and your children, or my children, are going to be paying for it via inflation and taxation. You don't just manifest prosperity, right?
Yeah, but you can't be talking about spending, Bob. Because neither side has tackled spending, so that's not a differentiator between the two.
You're right. You're right there. Neither of them have tackled spending.
We both don't agree with that. We both agree somebody should be talking about it, but nobody's talking about it, right? Trump wants to give tax cuts. I don't know how that's going to help things. And I don't think he's going to spend less on the military. He might not be sending stuff to the Ukraine, but he's going to spend more on the military too.
We don't need more tax cuts. I agree with you at this point. We have to stop spending.
Oh, hey!
We have to stop spending.
Oh,
stop spending. Then we can talk tax cuts. Till then, stop spending. But on the other side of it, we should not raise taxes.
Can we talk tax increases, Bob? Not yet.
No
spending
tax
cuts
increases,
first. Till the spending cuts.
Massive spending cuts.
Spending
first.
cuts first. I'd be willing to agree with that for you, but I don't think politically you could get away with that, because I think the Democrats will want tax increases, although the Republicans don't want spending cuts either. But I agree across the board, spending cuts. I think tax increases on a certain portion of the population. You're not going to solve the whole problem, but
you got to put that stuff back on the states. You really do. You got to get to the point where you say, "I'm sorry, you need new roads, fund it."
Yeah, and then you're going to have more fees and tolls and all that kind of stuff.
Fine. Put it on the states.
Your car license will be $500 a year or something.
Put it on the states.
It's
one of the most interesting stories I've heard in Tennessee. Like our license plate tags here are $35, I think, a year. And in California, people were telling me that they were paying like $1,300 a year for a license plate tag on the truck.
Yeah, that happens.
I just can't imagine how that is affordable for somebody living on $35,000 a year.
It's not. It's not affordable. So,
but at the same time, California is just about to pass free health care for illegals. It's not just that. It's actually, I guess I was reading they're going to give $125,000 towards a house to illegals.
I
see that?
I did not see that. I did not see that. I did see. I don't know if you've been getting them, but I've been getting direct mailings, and maybe it's because I'm in Wisconsin. It's coming from the Republican Party of Wisconsin with Donald J. Trump on it. I don't think I've gotten a direct mailing for a presidential candidate in a while.
I've not gotten one.
So it says Trump's common sense agenda. So he's got 9 items listed. Eliminate taxes on Social Security for seniors. Kamala hasn't copied that one yet, but give her time. Let the voters in each state decide their own abortion policies. Are you good with those two so far?
Say that last one again.
Let the voters in each state decide their own abortion policies.
Yes, I'm good with that. Yep.
Secure the southern border, deport criminal illegals, and demolish foreign drug cartels. How can you not be for that?
Take out the word criminal before illegals, and I'm good with it.
All right. You want all illegals gone.
That's right.
All right. Rebuild our, well, if rebuild our cities. Well, that's kind of general. 5, keep violent criminals off the streets. Again, that's pretty general. I don't know who's not for those.
How?
Keep
How is she going to do this? That's the
No,
question.
this is his agenda. This is Donald's.
Oh, sorry. How is he going to do this? Is the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
How is he going to do this?
I don't
So
know. It's like apple pie and grandma. Who's going to disagree with rebuilding our cities and keeping violent criminals off the streets?
So that's the thing, right? It's the same argument I was making against Kamala earlier. You have to say how you're going to do this stuff and commit to it. And
Yep. Well, he's got 4 more. Keep men out of women's sports. I don't know why this is number 6, and protect women's scholarships by reversing the Biden-Harris rewrite of Title IX. I think you're for that, right?
Yep.
I think men should not compete in women's sports. I'm going to be radical there and just say that's the case. Unleash American energy production to lower gas prices and inflation. I don't know. We're producing more energy than we ever have, and we're exporting some of it. So I don't quite know what he's getting at there, but good luck with that. Stop the out of control spending to end inflation. Well, Donald, you kind of spent more than anyone else, but
I wouldn't say he spent more than anybody else, but
he raised the deficit more.
He spent as much as anybody else.
Yeah. 9, eliminate taxes on tips for tip-based workers, which we've talked about before, and I think that's ridiculous. But and then he disavows Project 2025. Good luck with that. And then he goes through Kamala's policies.
Here's the thing.
It's interesting.
It's not a government solution. It's not something government should do, but we should find a way to get rid of tips.
I don't disagree. We're one of the few countries that we make people rely upon them, right?
It's a bit out of control. And the main issue I have with it is if you don't give a tip, the server's not hardly making anything, right?
It's true.
So, I mean, they do need to make a living. That's kind of what's interesting to me. But I don't know how maybe you somehow outlaw the facilitation of the business giving the tips, right? So you can't tip on a credit card. I don't know.
Well,
again, I don't think it's a government, but I don't think that government should do that because it's big government and more regulation, and I don't like that. But yeah, we need to get away from tipping.
Yeah, it's just a stupid. I mean, the rest of the world you tip for exceptional service, right?
Yep.
Nothing's expected.
Unless you're an American, and then you feel bad when you go over to Europe.
Right.
And you
We end up. They love seeing us because we're like,
Yeah.
oh, we'll throw 20% while they're making a decent living, and then they're like, oh, we get more.
Yeah.
No, we just need to require employers to pay a living wage to people and not have the tip. If that means the food costs 20% more, what do you know? It comes out in the wash.
I was in Italy one time, and it was one of those very touristy areas, right, not far off of the Trevi Fountain. Sat down to eat because I was reading online how great this place was.
Were you
Which
picking
I'm
the
not sure I
quarters out
agree.
of the fountain? I know you do that.
Well, how else are you going to tip the people there? They don't have quarters, by the way. They're pesos.
That's right. They're pesos. What is is
Euro.
it lira?
Euro.
No, they're euro now.
Yeah.
Well, they used to be lira, I think. No.
Yeah, in Italy, yeah. They were
Now
euro.
I've forgotten all the different currencies.
Yeah.
There was the Deutschmark, right? That was Germany.
Yep.
What was the drachma? Oh man, that stinks. I can't remember. I used to know all the European currencies, and now it's all just euro. That stinks. But go ahead.
Clearly, at the bottom of the original receipt, it's a gratuity included. So I just didn't tip the guy, and the waiter comes over to me and he's like, "You need to tip me. Why aren't you tipping me?" He knew well I was
Somebody
American,
said that?
obviously. Yeah.
Oh, really? He's trying to
And I
goad you
said,
into
tip
tipping
says
it?
it's included right there. And that was it, But they're used to Americans giving more money and not reading either. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you on the tipping. We need to do away with that.
Yeah, needs to go.
Let's see. We talked about campaign strategies. We talked about the convention.
I tip well, by the way, just to make that clear. Even for bad service, I generally tip.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably tip better than I should, which it sounds like is the same for you.
I never tip less than 20%. And
Really?
10 years ago, I was tipping 20%.
Oh, you were ahead of the. Because I noticed that tipping's gone up, right?
Yeah.
I think there's been a bunch of articles on not only tip inflation, right? It used to be, I think it started at 10% and then it became 15. Sort of like the toll booth charges became used to be a
Yeah.
dime for a toll booth, and then somehow it's now $1.50.
But as prices have gone up, obviously 20% of $20 is
Right,
more than 20% of $10.
right. So you
And
get both of them.
they get,
You get the
yeah,
double dip.
which
So
is,
15 was standard for a long time, and now it's like 18, 20. I saw something that started with 25 the other day. You know how they turn the screen around or whatever? It's like 25 was the first one. I'm like, what the hell? Then I put in custom. No, I didn't. But yeah, it seems like it's gone actually the opposite way, which I think was a COVID thing because it was essential workers, which I understood. But all right, so we've been talking about tipping and inflation and everything, and Kamala came up with, I think it was sort of her first policy, right? Her discussion in regards to going after price gouging, which then raises this idea of price controls. Although I don't think she ever used the term price controls, which I think haven't been in place or tried since the Nixon administration, if I remember correctly.
been in the 70s.
Yep. And I think that was a horrible result, if I remember. And I don't, being an economist, and I don't think price controls work. So that's just my general opinion. I don't know if she was talking price controls or not. She was talking price gouging, right? Especially on
Do you
food
give any
prices.
specific examples? Yes, that's what I heard, but I don't remember any specific
I
examples.
don't think she gave specific examples. So the question I had was,
She was just trying to deflect the blame from the government, in my opinion.
yeah, I mean, clearly they're being hit on inflation. So you need to kind of point the finger at somebody else. I get that. But you kind of have to have data to back it up, right? So the question is, was there price gouging during COVID, right? And I think I sent you some things, and I've been reading about some things, whether there was the Federal Reserve did a study, Federal Reserve of San Francisco did a quick study to kind of look at different measures to say, okay, here's the data we have. Do we think that price gouging would be, your costs have gone up. I had a retail store, I had a wine store. Our costs would go up. The distributor would raise their price. We had kind of a margin that we would work on, let's say 30% or whatever. So we would mark up the price that the distributor gave us to the
30%
retail
or
price.
33
Right,
or whatever.
30%, yeah. Which we would kind of do across the board depending on the product. Some would be a little bit less, some would be more, but generally you'd average out to something like that. I think groceries operates on an even smaller margin, less than 10%,
I think
probably.
1.5% is what I was reading.
Yeah, I think that's overall profit margin, not necessarily gross margin, which are two different things. Being an accountant, gross margin would be just the cost of the product over what you're selling it for. Your profit margin would include your rent, your labor costs, and all of that, right? I think their profit margins are probably 1%. I think their gross margins are probably lower than 10%, but then you subtract all the other costs. So I really only care about, for the purpose of this discussion, what the markup was, right? Because the other costs are going to vary over time, and either you're going to have, for whatever reason, whether somebody raises your rent or whatnot, that's going to, or you have less rent, or that's irrelevant to what your markup is. I would say your markup is the key. So the Federal Reserve actually looked at that, and they looked at markup. And what they found was, overall, they didn't see price gouging, right? On an aggregate level, they said Yeah, there is some going on, but in an economic recovery, there's always some of that because there's more demand than there is supply at that point. So there's more pricing power by the firm. So when they have more pricing power, they tend to try to get some margin back. So that sort of makes sense.
Some of that
The
is probably also product specific, right? Something that's
yeah,
maybe a
the
fad
thing.
or a trend is getting marked up because it's going to sell regardless.
Well, what they did find was that there were certain sectors where it definitely did occur, right? So like automotive, they said that definitely occurred. There appeared to be some gouging. You know, either you couldn't, because if you remember, you couldn't get a car, right? So the dealerships were like, well, we're going to sell them for whatever we could get, right? So their margins would have went up on cars because there was so much excess demand versus supply because of the chip shortage and whatnot that they weren't producing cars like they would, if you remember, as
Yep.
we were getting out of COVID. And I think in food and general merchandise, they also found that to be the case, and gas and petroleum products. So were certain sectors, and I would say there's sectors. The problem is with something like this that in a perfect, like coming from an economic standpoint, in a perfect free market system, you wouldn't be able to do it, right? You wouldn't be able to get excess margins because your competitor next door would say, well, if you're going to price it up 10%, I'm going to price it up 9%, and I'm going to get the customers by taking some of you, not pricing it as high as you would and
Yep.
not gouging,
That's
right?
exactly how I would do it if I was a retailer.
And in theory, that should be the case. The problem is we have concentrations, right? Especially in grocery, I would say, like local grocery. Yes, you could order from Walmart online and things like that, but there is at least been consolidation in the grocery store industry. Like Kroger's and Albertson have bought
Yeah.
up a lot of the local grocery stores, right?
Yep.
And so they have a lot of local people could switch, but then you get in the switching costs, which is another economic term. Whether I used to shop at Jewel every week, so I know Jewel store. I know what I could get there. It's going to cost me
The quality
some.
level, you're
Yeah,
comfortable
it's
with
going to
it.
cost me time and inconvenience to go to Walmart, and then I'm going to have to learn that what the products they have and what the people don't do that because they just generally, unless it gets out of control, they're going to continue to do what they've done. So by having having there used to be Dominic's and Jewel, and there's no longer that. And I think Albertsons might own Jewel in Chicago area, but that's happened all across the country. Kroger, Albertsons, maybe Pick and Save. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
so
another.
that's the thing, right? Is so a lot of the left talking points argue, well, your profit went from, I'm just going to throw out numbers, 5 billion to 10 billion during COVID, right? But the truth is, profit, the markup stayed the same. They're making, we'll call it 1.5% on groceries each item. But because they bought out so many of these other stores that either failed or they could afford, there's more volume, therefore more money and more profit. They're not gouging in most cases. That said, this is kind of nerdy to say, but I like to play this MMORPG. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Okay, it's a video game.
What?
It's an online video game.
I
Part of
never
this
knew of
video
this.
game, so you can go out and you can mine or you can craft food or other things, right? And you can sell it online in the market board. Part of the game. So what I generally will do to make money, and at this point in time, I'm not rich, but video game currency, I have $61 million.
61 what? Dollars?
61,593,000 video game
Holy
dollars.
shit,
So
Bob.
here's what I do.
You're the Elon Musk of.
I go out and I find stuff on the board that's high in demand, and I buy half of it. So the majority of what I buy, let's say it's marked at $100. By the time I buy half of it, everything above might be worth $5,000.
So you
So
try
now
to control the market.
So I control the market. I create the demand by buying everything up, and then I mark all that stuff I bought for cheap
You bastard.
and resell it, right? So in a way, Jewel isn't going next door to Mariano's or Kroger and buying all the lettuce up and selling it in their store for 3 times its worth. Instead, they just go out and buy the whole next store, right? Which is completely legal.
Right.
That's the difference.
Well,
But
sort
so
of,
there's
sort
not
of
much.
legal.
There's not a lot Kamala can do about that by capping the price of groceries.
We have a Federal Trade Commission, right? The FTC, and they're responsible for approving those types of mergers, right? And usually, what they'll do in those cases, because they'll look at market share and things like that. They're not stupid, but they'll make them divest some of the stores. But here's what happens: nobody ends up buying those stores, right? There's a bunch of empty Dominick stores in the Chicago area when they got bought up, and so they just go away. So you don't really have the competition unless somebody, because who's going to enter the market when you have a big player entering, buying another, and then they're like, oh, we'll divest these stores so we don't have, but somebody has to buy those stores and compete against them, right? That's kind of the trick, right? That's kind of the joke of it. The FTC will say, oh, you got to divest, 10% of the stores or 20% of the stores. But if nobody buys those stores to compete against the 800-pound gorilla, and who would at that point, right? You're going to get your butt kicked because they're going to have all the vendors and the negotiations, and they're going to be able to cut prices to drive you out of the market because they have a bigger balance sheet than you do.
Right.
So it's a joke. So they shouldn't even allow, should they allow a company to come in and do that in the first place? Say, no, you can't buy another chain to consolidate. And that's where you need to cut it off right there. Not instituting price controls later, because that's stupid, right? You need to say, no, we need to keep a free market so that there's healthy competition. And I think in a lot of industries, we kind of, especially I would say in grocery, probably banking a little bit. There's been quite a bit of banking consolidation over the last 20, 30 years. When we allow these companies to keep on buying and rolling up other companies to get bigger and bigger, we're losing that sort of competition and that what I would consider, in theory, the free market system. Do you kind of agree with that?
I
do you think
I do agree with that. So that's that. But that brings us back to really what we've been talking about for months: getting the money out of politics, right? Because it's these same big companies that are donating lots of money to these politicians, and that's why. And it's not just the politicians, but it's the bureaucrats as well are finding their ways in, on the corporate boards and things like that can then ignore the fact that we're monopolizing industry, hurting people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just the retail portion of it; it's the back end as well. These big, huge corporate farms, right? I bet you your pork probably tasted better 100 years ago, when the pigs weren't all cramped up to each other their whole lives, nowhere to live, stepping on each other's waist, eating crap grain instead of better quality food. You know what I mean? Like,
you're starting to sound like a hippie, Bob.
It's the truth. It's the way it is. I don't know how you fix it exactly, but I do know how you fix it. You get the money out of politics.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a fine line, right? I mean, to some extent, you want free market and you want corporations to be able to do what they can to cut. There's always economies of scale, and we're going to cut costs, and this is going to benefit the consumer at the end of the day, and then you end up with these huge corporate farms, and like you said, the food doesn't taste the same, and they might be using chemicals, and people are getting sick, and we don't know why they're getting sick, and then.
And,
right.
and there's a really easy way to prove that theory from a taste perspective. Go out, find yourself a bottle of Old Fitzgerald or your favorite whiskey,
What about Old
from
Forester?
Old Forester from 20, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and try it next to the bottle that's out in your store right now. There's a world of difference, and it's not even close.
Yeah, last week I tried a Twinkie from 30 years ago, and it tasted better than the Twinkie I
I
bought this
imagine,
week.
yeah, and you're still okay.
You're still okay. And it was still fine. There was nothing. The Twinkie was still fresh from 30 years ago.
So the team that I work closely with in information security, where I work, my first exposure to these people when I moved from a previous role was them eating MREs from like 80 years ago. They made a habit of going out and buying old MREs and then eating them at work to see how they tasted.
What does MRE stand for? Meal
Made ready to eat.
made ready to eat. Yeah.
Or it could be meal ready to eat, but it's one of those two. Some obviously an 80-year-old MRE not going to be great. No, it tastes fine. They didn't get sick. They're eating these old nasty MREs. I just find that completely humorous. And they still, to this, I mean, it's years later now. They're still going out and doing that stuff. It's interesting. I would not do that. I did not participate, for the record.
So I think we generally agree. I don't think there's evidence of huge systematic price gouging. I think she's on the wrong track here. Like you said, I think it's a diversionary tactic to say, although I think the record on inflation, if you compare it to other countries worldwide, I don't think our record is, I think our record's probably better than other countries. I was in Australia earlier in the year. I've been in other countries the last several years. I've heard the inflation story through them too, and I think it's actually been worse. So we have to kind of look globally what's happened during the COVID years, but clearly it's a diversionary. I don't have a problem with her jawboning firms, so to speak, threatening them, because I think that might keep them honest, right? As long as you don't institute some huge administrative burden and some stupid price control policy. I don't have a problem with her threatening firms because they might think twice about raising prices, right? I think that is a role of government to protect the consumer. And even though they allowed these firms to get huge in size where they had pricing power, that's kind of the animals have left the barn at that point. So I don't have a problem with her talking about it. If she's actually serious about instituting price controls and some type of overall administration, I have a problem with that.
Here's the thing, too, though, right? You mentioned inflation being a problem everywhere.
Yep.
But between 2015 and 2020, or 2021,
yep,
nearly 80% of all money ever printed happened. And it's even worse now, right? Because we've printed a lot more since then with COVID. So that's America. That's not the world, but I would imagine that it's been a similar happening elsewhere, and that's got to be a large portion of it.
Well, where did that money end up, Bob? That's the question, right? Where did the money end up?
If it was all in somebody's bank account, inflation wouldn't have occurred, right? So it ended up in the economy.
It needs to be spent.
And some of it, probably a large portion of it, ended up in real estate.
Real estate, right? Housing prices gone up, right?
Right. Like
stock market's at a record,
thing.
Right? Stock market's at a record.
Some of it obviously ended up in crypto.
Yeah, and some of it got spent on goods and services, right? Which led to inflation there.
Yep.
But if you're handing out money and then you have inflation, what's the harm? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a wash, isn't it?
It's not if you're poor.
Well, that's the thing, right? You're right. I mean, it's ending up in certain people's pockets, right?
Or if you're a first-time home buyer.
And it's ending up in the people's pocket that can most afford it, right? which then gets into my talk about taxes and whatever to kind of get some of that back, right? To kind of level. It ended up in somebody's pockets, and it wasn't the poor, and it wasn't the first-time home buyer, and it wasn't the people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. It was the people on the higher end of the economics. That's where the cash is now. So shouldn't we be able to solve our debt problem, claw some of that back? That's just the question.
How do you do it without taxing?
Well, you got to tax. That's the thing. You got to tax.
Well, why?
You got to get it back.
If you cut spending drastically,
well,
it would
we
slow
haven't
the
done
economy
that.
pretty bad.
Well, we haven't done that. Why haven't we done that? Because when we spend, guess where the money ends up, Bob? It ends up in the back of the same people's pocket. And guess where that ends up? That ends up in the politician's pocket.
So here's the thing.
And then the cycle continues and continues and continues, right?
Until recently, in quantitative easing times, under Obama, the Fed never owned mortgage-backed securities, and now they do, and they own a huge amount.
They got a big balance sheet, right?
Sell them. Sell every mortgage-backed security. It'll fix the housing cost problem real fast. And as a result, everything else will come back with it.
Well,
and that hurts me. It hurts you, too.
I think it'll raise rates, I think. If they start selling
it'll drop home prices real fast.
Well, yeah, because it's going to raise rates and nobody will be able to afford a home. Yeah, it will. We could try it, but we'll see. But anyways, that's kind of the cycle. That's why I think you either have to cut spending or raise taxes, because you got to claw back some of that. You actually have to do both, right? Because you got to stop the cycle of spending, and then you got to claw back sort of what's been gone out before, which is to the tune of whatever, $35 trillion, right?
So
that ended up in somebody's pocket.
Deflation is pretty rare in our history.
It happens. It does happen.
08, 09, right? It happened.
Yeah, it does happen. It has happened in foreign countries quite a bit.
So
Japan has experienced it quite a bit.
And that's why I lead towards, that was 08, 09 was kicked off because of real estate and bad debt. So if you can find a way to, and that's exactly what happened, and that's why they bought the mortgage-backed securities, right? So, you're going to need to trigger something like that. You're going to need to trigger deflation in order to slow the economy, and they're not going to do that. So it's not going to happen, right?
Nope, nobody's talked about it, that's for sure.
Nope.
Keep the Ferris wheel going as long as you can. We'll see how long it goes.
It's interesting.
All right, I think we've solved the world's problems tonight.
It was fun.
It was a good discussion. Hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll probably be back on in a couple weeks. Maybe we'll do something after the first debate before I leave the country. That would be fun. I hope they have that debate. I think it's scheduled for September 10th. So
I think it's going to happen. They're arguing over rules at this point, right?
Whether the mics are muted or not.
Yeah, now Trump wants them muted and Kamala doesn't. And Kamala wants to sit down and have notes or something. And
she wants a teleprompter, I think.
And
then we'll see how their interview goes tomorrow and see what they do. So lots going on. We're in the middle of crazy season. I think it's 73 days or 72 days or whatever.
Follow us. Send your questions, comments to at USA SC PAC. That's at USA SCPAC. We're the Sensible Center PAC on Twitter. Kevin, what's our email address?
It's sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com. And I'll check it if you have any comments or things that you'd like us to talk about. Hopefully you made it through the podcast without turning us off.
Until next time.
Until next time. Talk to you.